My name is Claire Miller. 6 months ago, my mother stood up at Easter dinner, looked right at me in front of 25 relatives, and announced that I was the only Miller who couldn't put a roof over her own head. My dad nodded along in silence, and my sister, Ashley, leaned over with that trademark pitying smile. "You're just jealous of my success, aren't you, Claire?" she whispered. But 2 weeks later, I invited her to tea at my new address. When she walked through the front gate, she turned pale, clutching her phone as if she might collapse. Her voice cracked when she finally dialed our mother. "Mom, you need to get here right now. You won't believe this." That moment was 13 years in the making, a journey from a cold studio apartment to a secret victory they never saw coming. Before I take you back to the Tuesday night that changed everything, please take a moment to like and subscribe to From My Heart if you believe in the power of standing your ground. And I'm curious, where in the world are you listening from today? Drop your city and local time in the comments below. Let me take you back to a rainy Tuesday night in November. At the time, I was 28 years old, living in a 500-square-foot studio in Southeast Portland. It was the kind of place where the window frames rattled every time a truck drove by, and the kitchen faucet dripped on a relentless 3-second cycle. Drip, drip, drip. No matter how hard I cranked the handle, it never stopped. A constant reminder of everything in my life that felt broken. I didn't hate that apartment, though. At least, I told myself I didn't. I was a cybersecurity analyst at a mid-sized firm downtown. It was my first real title after 4 years of grinding through soul-crushing contract gigs. I was making $68,000 a year, which sounded like a lot until you saw my spreadsheet. My student loan payment was $1,400 every single month. After rent, utilities, and debt, I lived on a strict diet of white rice and frozen vegetables. I drove a 2011 Civic with a cracked dashboard, and I knew down to the literal penny how much I could spend on groceries each week. That was the life my mother, B, loved to describe to our relatives at family dinners. But she didn't describe it with pride for my hard work. She made it sound like a cautionary tale. She'd sigh over the mashed potatoes and say, "Poor Claire, she's still in that tiny place. I guess some people just aren't wired for the big leagues." But here is what she never told them: the reason I had those student loans in the first place. In late August, 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave for college, my mother sat me down at the kitchen table. I can still see the way the sunlight hit the linoleum. Her voice was soft, that rehearsed, gentle tone she uses when she's about to destroy you. She told me my college fund, the one I'd been promised since I was a toddler, was gone. She claimed the market had swallowed it whole during a downturn. I sobbed into her arms, and she held me, whispering that everything would be okay. The very next morning, she helped me sign the federal loan paperwork with a smile, acting like she was my savior for helping me navigate the debt she'd just handed me. Meanwhile, my sister Ashley was the family golden child. At 27, she bought a 4-bedroom house in the hills of Oak Creek. My mother told everyone the same story. "Ashley saved every penny. She's just so smart with money." I believed that lie for 13 years. I lived in the shadow of my sister's success, feeling like the defective daughter who just couldn't get it right. I sat through a decade of Thanksgivings at Ashley's house, watching my mother run her hands along the quartz countertops and expensive light fixtures like she'd designed them herself. She would look at me and say, "Don't worry, Claire. Maybe if you find a more stable job, you'll have a kitchen like this one day." I would just nod and sip my water, unaware that the very floor I was standing on, the house Ashley was so proud of, had been paved with my future. I was the one paying for her success with every $1,400 check I wrote to the bank. I was living in a studio so she could live in a mansion. And the worst part? My mother was the one who handed her the keys. And I'm curious, where in the world are you listening from today? Drop your city and local time in the comments below. The shift happened on a Tuesday. I remember it clearly because I was sitting on the floor of my studio, my laptop heat singing my legs as I debugged a firewall configuration for a client presentation. The faucet was doing its usual dance, Drip, 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 when my phone buzzed on the hardwood. It was Uncle Silas. He was my mother's older brother, a man of few words who usually only reached out on birthdays or to send a dry text about the weather. But when I answered, his voice sounded heavy, like he'd been carrying a bag of stones for miles. "Claire," he said, his voice gravelly and hesitant. "I've been going back and forth about this for a decade, but I watched you at dinner last month, and I can't carry this for her anymore." My heart did a slow roll in my chest. "Carry what, Uncle Silas?" There was a long pause. I could hear him strike a match on the other end. "Your mother didn't lose that college fund in the market, sweetheart. She withdrew it. Every cent of it, $42,380. The room went silent. The rattling window, the dripping faucet, it all just stopped. "She did what?" I whispered. "It was the March you turned 18, Silas continued, his voice gaining strength now that the secret was out. "I was at the bank. I watched her sign the withdrawal form. I told her it was wrong, that it was yours. She told me to mind my own business. Then she didn't speak to me for 2 years. 2 weeks after she took that money, Ashley closed on the down payment for her house." I slid off the couch and onto the cold kitchen tile. The phone was pressed so hard against my ear it hurt. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, something behind my ribs just went quiet. It was like a pilot light going out. All those years of feeling less than. All those years of believing I was the irresponsible one because I couldn't save like Ashley, flashed before my eyes. The math was brutal. With conservative growth over 13 years, that fund would have been worth nearly $60,000 today. That money was supposed to be my education, my safety net, my start in life. Instead, it had been handed over to pay for my sister's front door, while I was left to drown in high-interest debt. "I kept the bank statements, Claire," Silas said quietly. "The originals. I have the paper with her signature. You tell me when you're ready, and I'll put them in the mail." I sat on that floor for hours after the line went dead. I stared at a water stain on the ceiling and realized that my mother wasn't just a liar. She was an architect. She had built a narrative where I was the failure and Ashley was the star, all while using my stolen future as the foundation. I had two choices. I could call her right now and scream, which would only give her a chance to play the victim and turn the family against unstable Claire. Or I could do something else. I opened my laptop, but I didn't go back to the firewall. I created a new spreadsheet. The target at the bottom was a 7-figure number. Confrontation gives liars a stage to perform on, and I wasn't going to give her that. I decided, right then and there, that I would build my own stage instead. I sat through a decade of Thanksgivings at Ashley's house, watching my mother run her hands along the quartz countertops and expensive light fixtures like she'd designed them herself. She would look at me and say, "Don't worry, Claire. Maybe if you find a more stable job, you'll have a kitchen like this one day." I would just nod and sip my water, unaware that the very floor I was standing on, the house Ashley was so proud of, had been paved with my future. I was the one paying for her success with every $400 check I wrote to the bank. I was living in a studio so she could live in a mansion. And the worst part? My mother was the one who handed her the keys. And I'm curious, where in the world are you listening from today? Drop your city and local time in the comments below. A year can change everything if you let it. After that call with Uncle Silas, I stopped looking for my mother's approval. I realized that her scoreboard was rigged, so I stopped playing her game. My mother measured worth in square footage and social status. I decided to measure mine in equity and independence. I reached out to my mentor at work, Eleanor Vance. She was the kind of woman who wore reading glasses on a chain like a librarian, but could dismantle a global network threat in 12 minutes. I asked her one question. What does it take to get to the top floor? Eleanor looked at me over her glasses and pushed a file across the desk. It was an enterprise security audit for a massive regional hospital chain, a project so ugly and high stakes that the previous lead had quit. "If you land this, Claire, they'll know your name in the boardroom, but you won't have a life for 6 months." "I don't need a life," I told her. "I need a win." For the next year, I became a ghost. I worked 14-hour days, living on black coffee and the sheer adrenaline of my own ambition. I automated 40% of my paycheck into an investment account and pretended it didn't exist. I stopped sharing anything about my job with my family. Why? Because every time I'd mentioned a success before, my mother had waved it off as a hobby or pivoted the conversation to Ashley's new patio furniture within 2 sentences. So, I went silent. When B called to tell me about a cheaper apartment or a guy who owns his own house, I just said, "That's nice, Mom," and went back to my server migrations. I wasn't hiding, I was protecting my peace. The hospital audit shipped on time and under budget. The client signed a 3-year renewal worth millions. Eleanor didn't just give me a pat on the back, she gave me a promotion to senior manager. My salary jumped to $145,000 plus bonuses. I didn't post about it on Facebook. I didn't call my dad. I just opened my spreadsheet, the one I'd built at 3 a.m. on that cold November night, and updated the numbers. For the first time, the target column didn't look like a dream. It looked like an appointment. I started driving through neighborhoods on Saturday mornings, the ones my mother thought were out of my league. I wasn't looking for a house to show off. I was looking for a feeling, and I found it on a hillside in Oak Creek, ironically just 10 minutes from Ashley, but worlds away. A 4-bedroom home with floor-to-ceiling windows that turned the sunset into a wall of copper light. The day I signed the deed, the title agent handed me the keys. They were warm from the sunlight. I sat in my car, gripped them in my palm, and realized I had the key. I had the deed. And most importantly, I finally had a secret worth keeping. I sat through a decade of Thanksgivings at Ashley's house, watching my mother run her hands along the quartz countertops and expensive light fixtures like she'd designed them herself. She would look at me and say, "Don't worry, Claire. Maybe if you find a more stable job, you'll have a kitchen like this one day." I would just nod and sip my water, unaware that the very floor I was standing on, the house Ashley was so proud of, had been paved with my future. I was the one paying for her success with every $1,400 check I wrote to the bank. I was living in a studio so she could live in a mansion. And the worst part? My mother was the one who handed her the keys. And I'm curious, where in the world are you listening from today? Drop your city and local time in the comments below. Easter Sunday arrived with a crisp, mocking brightness. Ashley's house was decorated to within an inch of its life, tulips in every vase, linen napkins folded into perfect swans, and the smell of honey-glazed ham wafting through the air. My mother, Bea, was in full director mode, guiding relatives through the house like a museum docent. "Notice the shiplap?" she'd whisper to Aunt Martha. Ashley picked the shade herself. She has such an eye for quality. It's what happens when you're disciplined with your life. I walked in wearing a simple navy blouse and jeans, carrying a small gift for my niece. I was a ghost in their machine. Within 3 minutes, Bea found me. She didn't say hello, she just pinched the fabric of my sleeve and sighed. "You look thin, Claire. Are you eating? I told Martha you're looking for a cheaper place." "It's okay to admit you're struggling, honey. Pride is a heavy burden." I just smiled and sipped my sparkling water. I didn't correct her. I didn't tell her I had just signed a deed for a house that made Ashley's look like a starter home. I was waiting for the moment I knew was coming. After dinner, the entire family gathered in the living room. This was Bea's stage. She stood in the center of the room, wine glass raised, her pearls gleaming under the recessed lighting. "I just want to say a few words," she began, her voice dripping with that rehearsed sweetness. "Ashley, thank you for hosting this house, this life you've built. This is what hard work and family values look like. We are so proud of you for doing it the right way." The room applauded. Ashley beamed, leaning back into her $5,000 sofa. Then, Bea turned her gaze to me. The room went quiet. It was that predatory silence, the kind where everyone knows a public shaming is disguised as concern. "And Claire," Bea said, her voice dropping into a pitying vibrato, "we're all rooting for you too. One day, if you listen to your sister's advice and stop playing around with those computer things, you might finally be able to put down roots. There's no shame in starting over at 31. Ashley chimed in, her voice loud enough for the whole room to hear. Seriously, Claire, are you just jealous? It's okay to feel that way. I'd be jealous too if I were still renting a studio while my sister lived like this. Aunt Martha reached out and patted my arm. Gloria told us you're downsizing, dear. I know a landlord in a more affordable area. He's very flexible. They had done it. In under 10 minutes, they had painted a picture of me as a desperate, struggling failure to everyone I loved. They had used their success as a weapon to keep me small. I looked over at Uncle Silas in the corner. He gave me a single, slow nod. He knew what was in my car. He knew the truth was sitting in a manila envelope in my back seat. I set my glass down on the granite island, the island I now knew had been paid for with my stolen future. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just looked Ashley dead in the eye and said, I'm not looking for a cheaper place, Martha. But Ashley, since you're so fond of quality, why don't you and Mom come over for tea this Saturday? I've moved. I'd love for you to see the view. The confusion on Bee's face was almost delicious. You moved? To another apartment? Just come, I said, pulling on my jacket. Saturday, 2 o'clock. I'll text you the address. As I walked out the door, I heard Bee's voice trailing behind me, already trying to regain control of the narrative. She's probably renting a basement somewhere. Poor thing, she's always been so difficult. I didn't look back. I drove toward the hills, toward my own front door, and for the first time in 13 years, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like the author of the final chapter. I sat through a decade of Thanksgivings at Ashley's house, watching my mother run her hands along the quartz countertops and expensive light fixtures like she'd designed them herself. She would look at me and say, "Don't worry, Claire. Maybe if you find a more stable job, you'll have a kitchen like this one day." I would just nod and sip my water, unaware that the very floor I was standing on, the house Ashley was so proud of, had been paved with my future. I was the one paying for her success with every $1,400 check I wrote to the bank. I was living in a studio so she could live in a mansion. And the worst part? My mother was the one who handed her the keys. And I'm curious, where in the world are you listening from today? Drop your city and local time in the comments below. Saturday afternoon was bathed in a deceptive golden light. When Ashley and Bea pulled into my driveway in the Oak Creek Hills, they didn't get out of the car for 3 full minutes. I watched from the floor-to-ceiling windows as they stared up at the stone fireplace and the sweeping wraparound deck. When I opened the door, Bea didn't even say hello. She stepped into the vaulted entryway, her eyes darting like she was looking for a "for rent" sign. "How?" she whispered, her voice paper-thin. "Claire, whose house is this?" "Mine, Mom. I'm a senior director now. Since you stopped asking about my job, I stopped telling you." The air in the room turned brittle. Ashley sat on the edge of my sofa, her face a mask of pure, disorienting confusion. "But you had student loans," she stammered. "We both started with nothing. Mom said our college funds were lost." "Yours wasn't lost, Ashley." I walked to the maple table and laid out the manila envelope Uncle Silas had sent. I slid the bank statement toward them, the one with Bea's neat, cursive signature dated 2 weeks before Ashley's down payment cleared. $42,380. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard. Ashley's eyes tracked the numbers, then shifted to our mother. "Mom, you told me this was your savings. You told me Claire's fund was gone." Bea's face turned a frantic shade of red. "I did what was best for the family. You were getting married, Ashley. Claire was always fine on her own." "I was fine because you gave me no choice," I said, my voice as steady as the foundation of my house. "You stole my education to buy Ashley's status, then spent 13 years calling me a failure for struggling under the debt you created." For the first time in my life, my mother had nothing to say. I didn't ask for the money back. I didn't need it. I had built this empire out of the ashes of her lies. I simply looked them both in the eye and told them that while they were welcome as guests, they were no longer the narrators of my life. I have the key. I have the deed. And most importantly, I finally own the truth. I sat through a decade of Thanksgivings at Ashley's house, watching my mother run her hands along the quartz countertops and expensive light fixtures like she'd designed them herself. She would look at me and say, "Don't worry, Claire. Maybe if you find a more stable job, you'll have a kitchen like this one day." I would just nod and sip my water, unaware that the very floor I was standing on, the house Ashley was so proud of, had been paved with my future. I was the one paying for her success, with every $1,400 check I wrote to the bank. I was living in a studio so she could live in a mansion. And the worst part? My mother was the one who handed her the keys. And I'm curious, where in the world are you listening from today? Drop your city and local time in the comments below. In the end, I realized that success isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your own narrative. If you are living by someone else's ruler, put it down and start measuring your worth by your own resilience. Silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. If this story hit home, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, which of the three lessons resonated with you most? Your support keeps these stories alive. Thank you so much for staying until the end. I'm Claire, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye for now.